we all actually have two fears in facing any action. Number one is FOMO, fear of missing out. The positive side of everything, right, is we're like, I want to do this to get this reward, this learning, this discovery, and we try and get our FOMO raging. But the other side of the fear we face is fear of failure, right? We'd also agree that everybody has this. So a very simple equation that you need to master, and we'll talk about how to do that in a moment, is if your FOMO is greater than your fear of failure, you're going to take action. If your fear of failure is greater than your FOMO, you're not going to take action, right? You can see the equation in your head.
Welcome to the Spartan Up podcast with Joe De Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Race.
We are talking about overcoming obstacles. The same way we teach people to get over obstacles on the course, we will teach you here on the Spartan Up podcast to get over obstacles in your mind.
When you learn to choose risk, you learn to choose possibility. Sukhinder Singh Cassidy explains how this strategy works on a wrestling mat, on a Spartan course, or a Silicon Valley startup.
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by DUROLANE, a single injection that may provide up to 6 months relief from osteoarthritis knee pain. Risks can include general knee pain and pain at the injection site. You can see full prescribing information at durolane.com.
Joe De Sena here, founder and CEO of Spartan. And we have Sukhinder Singh Cassidy. Did I get that right?
You did. You nailed it.
Author of Choose Possibility. We also have a special guest. My assistant is in the room because she heard I was going to be speaking to you. And she wants to listen because she feels like she's going to learn so much. By the way, I've done literally 1,000 podcasts. She's never sat in one of them. So you are clearly special. And I don't know, we're going to learn how to take risks today.
Sounds good. And now you've set a high bar. So you can give me a pass-fail at the end of this podcast. She's either going to give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
You've been a super executive. You've taken some companies from nothing to something. How have you done it? You've taken a lot of risks.
Well, I think that's the premise of the book. The premise of the book is everybody thinks that risk-taking is for the risky, right? I mean, you look at Richard Branson, and by the way, very cool that you replayed your interview with him. I found that fascinating. But, you look at Elon Musk or Richard Branson or Jeff Bezos, and you think, well, look at these mighty risk-takers. And so while that's very cool to watch, it makes risk-taking rather a formidable thought, right? You sort of think like, well, if I can't do it big, why do it at all? And yet, if you looked at my career, I would say if there's one thing that's a constant, it's that I've taken a number of risks to unlock cumulative reward. But if you looked at any single risk I'd taken, you might just stop, right? You might say because when we think of risk as a single event, it's hard to unlock the rewards. When we think of risk taking as a process, we unlock them all. And to answer your question on, you call me a super executive. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I appreciate the comment. I counted 28 distinct decisions I made in my career. Some were big, some were little. Some were little risks that unlocked big rewards. Some were big risks that, quite frankly, failed to kill me. You know what I mean? I recovered just fine. And others were, big leaps with small outcomes, much smaller rewards. The point is, it's a cyclical process. And so you have to look back at that process and, discern what you can from it so you can, share it with others, as opposed to having risk be a mystery.
Is it kind of like flipping a coin? If we flip a coin, 10,000 times, it's roughly going to land 50% on heads, 50% on tails, as opposed to flipping it once. Like you're saying, take a bunch of risks, make sure none of them are fatal. None of them have fatal potential outcomes.
Well, I'm saying that even when you think they're fatal, they really aren't. I am saying that I think you can get the odds better than 50-50. Let's put it this way. The best traders in the world, the best portfolio managers in the world, right? They're managing a portfolio of risks. And those who outperform, they're not 50-50. They might be 60-40. They might be 70-30. And of course,
you're going to be annoyed because you finished the book already. When's the book coming out?
The book comes out August 17th.
All right, so I don't know if you can make any edits or not, but my friend runs probably the largest hedge fund in the world. He's my best friend. Mm-hmm. And he said his best traders, and he's got 1,000 traders, they're right about 51% of the time, 52% of the time.
Believe me, I'm not a hedge fund manager. I trust your buddy. If he says it's 51% in the hedge fund industry, it's 51%, right? The point is that, there are industries and superstars, who've built their entire careers on taking multiple risks. So the idea that it's one, I think, is the flaw. And I call that the myth of the single choice. We all wait to act on the one big choice. And I'm like, that's a lot of pressure.
I've thought a lot about, when I was growing up, I had a business at 13 or 14 years old. and I would try to recruit the other kids in the neighborhood to work with me.
Mm-hmm.
And they just didn't feel like they wanted to clean swimming pools. Like they wanted to do something bigger. They were
Yes.
waiting to take a different kind of risk.
Yes.
And what I found over life is you just got to get going.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, when I was cleaning pools, I met somebody which helped me get further along to Wall Street. And so is that what you're saying? Like just get going?
Well, I think there's get going and get smarter. So like for sure get going, because your point is like you build momentum while somebody else is inert. And what they don't realize is when they're inert, the gap between what they want and what they have is actually bigger than being in motion, any kind of motion, to your point, because motion begets data begets feedback, right? And you start, so you're already on the path, even if your first choice is not a perfect choice. So yes, that is part of what I'm saying. The second part of what I'm saying is, of course, I'm not telling you to be like, dumb in how you take risks. I'm saying there's a way to get smarter about the risks you take and become a calculated risk taker. But if you did nothing else, getting going is, let's call it, a big part of the equation. And then once you're in motion and you want to be a better risk taker, the whole thing is like, okay, well, how do you get calculated about bigger choices, right? And so you can improve your odds while knowing that any single choice may not be perfect. But I do like your analogy of sort of, and I see this all the time. People aim for perfect, and so they do nothing. People aim for the big win, so they don't take the small win. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure people who take big risks are actually have made thousands of calculated risks in their lifetime, many of which were small. And we shouldn't always presume there's a correlation between small risk, small reward, large risk, large reward. That's another myth we all face. Besides the myth of the single choice, there's this myth of what I call risk and reward. You think it's all linear and proportional, and somebody's waiting to reward you for a massive risk. And if it's a little risk, there probably isn't big upside. So why take it? And I think that correlation is pretty difficult on a one-to-one basis.
I'm going through it now with two of my kids. They wrestle, and one of them is definitely more of a perfectionist than the other one. And so when the whistle blows for the older perfectionist, he's cautious. He doesn't want to make a mistake. And what I'm learning in wrestling, because I didn't wrestle as a kid, is you actually, and in life, and this is what your book I think is about, you have to take some, like, it's just a learning process, and losing that match is not fatal. My younger son, he doesn't care. Whistle blows. He's attacking. Doesn't matter what happens. He'll figure out a way to get out of it. And he's actually a worse wrestler.
Yeah.
But he's outperforming the one that doesn't want to take the risks.
Well, first of all, have both your boys take the risk quiz. I'd be curious. I bet you can. I'd be curious to see the results. Make sure you send them to me. And I think this notion of perfection, by the way, I've seen it as a CEO, right? So, I mean, I was at Google for many years, as you know. I was an executive there, and then I ran StubHub most recently. Let me tell you, there's no better learning curve on like how people think about risk than to ask people to do their quarterly OKRs, objectives and key results. Like you will have 12 weeks to get it done, right? And let's all agree, like an OKR is a prediction on what's going to happen in your business. I predict that I'll do this, then this will happen, then I'll do this, then I'll do it. What you see is people who come to you and spend 2 out of 12 weeks, no, maybe 3, perfecting their OKRs. And you know what it all is? It's like, I'm going to do this, then this will happen, then I'll do this, then this will happen. It's all abstract, by the way, but they put more and more detail into a philosophy that says every single move I make is going to go right. So let me just spell it out in detail. And that should give you comfort and me comfort that I'm the smartest person and that I know what I'm doing. So I can make any move. And then the other people were like, I've got 12 weeks. I'm going to spend like an hour doing my OKRs because I think I have like a whiteboard idea where we need to go. And I have 3 hypotheses, but like, why bother filling in the rest? Because I'm only going to know when I get into it. And then I can keep adjusting my plan as I go. And it's remarkable to me. People want to plan endlessly for the upside from afar because it makes them feel comfortable, right? Like they think they can take the uncertainty out of risk taking by just writing everything down and aiming for perfection. But just because you have a perfect plan doesn't mean life unfolds that way. So this is where getting into motion, to your point, gets you on a learning curve that's quite frankly far more valuable than planning in the abstract.
You institutionalized my very juvenile thinking with, as a kid, as I'm listening to you, like, I had this pool business, right? It certainly wasn't glamorous. I understand why a lot of kids didn't want to join me, but I was getting data.
Yep, you got it.
I was working for folks that had families and had nice cars and nice houses, and I was learning, like, how did they get those houses? Mm-hmm. How did they get those cars? Or is that family operating well? or not so well, like, you know, and so it was incredibly valuable, and then guided me to the next step.
You got it. And you did something else that, you know, we talk about in the book, and I promise you there's lots more in the book than just these tips, but you did what I call getting proximate. So I always say proximity over planning. So you can plan from afar and be perfect, or you can get proximate to the thing you want, even if you don't know how to get it. So, right, what happens when you get proximate? Even if you get proximate, like you're running a pool business and maybe one day you want to run, you know, a fitness company, you know, or be a CEO of something else, but you're getting proximate to what people who are successful look like, and you're learning through osmosis, right? In that case, you weren't even, let's say, apprenticing in the job you want. You're just getting proximate by running any business close to sort of a worldview that you want for yourself one day. So I think that is, I think that's very much what I believe as well. And I'll take you one further. You had a pool business. My first job outside of my dad's office was, wait for it, working as a receptionist at the local Filter Queen franchise. And people are like, I bet nobody even knows what a Filter Queen is. Do you know what a Filter Queen is? You don't?
No,
Okay. So Filter Queen, I'm like, I don't think I'm that much older than you, but I'm too scared to ask. But a Filter Queen is like this. The Filter Queen is this like $1,000 vacuum cleaner. But I would sit at the receptionist, and mostly I would take calls from customers, some of whom were pretty freaking angry with the Filter Queen they bought. But all the action was off to the side. There was this room where people literally had the yellow pages open, and they were calling people, cold calling to make a living. And I tell you, to your point, like, it taught me something about, you know, about taking risks to pipeline, taking risks for discovery, putting yourself out there and getting comfortable. That, to your point, let's work portfolio theory. 9 out of every 10 calls, somebody's going to, you know, tell you to go away. That's a polite way of saying it, you know, in order to get the one outcome. But you plan for that downside, right? You actually plan for it. So it's funny how we all get our introduction to risk taking. I got some from my father, who was an entrepreneur, but I remember that first job, like, it taught me the power of selling and risk taking for discovery, including the risk taking that kind of rejection brings.
If you had to pick percentages of people out there that are just stuck, it's probably a large percentage, right? Like,
yeah, well, actually, this is the good news about that risk-taking quiz I told you that, you know, anybody can take on the site, on the book site called choosepossibility.com. Before we put out the risk quiz, and let's be clear, I am not an academic. I am an operator. So, like, you know, caveat emptor. This, like, risk quiz was built by me and my team. But we put it out to a sample of the U.S. population before we put it on LinkedIn. And to answer your question, yes, of the 4 archetypes of risk-taking, 60% of the general population, what we call contemplators, which means they're really good at the pros and cons and the analysis. And of course, they're ambitious. But if you ask them where they struggle, it's in making a decision because they have fear of failure. And if you ask them their biggest regrets, it's often on the moves not made. And that's 60% of the population. That's the most common archetype, is the contemplator. Doesn't mean you're not thinking about it. You know, it's about getting yourself in motion.
So for all of us listening and watching, we go on there, we find we're part of the 60%. Maybe my older son is. How do you unwind that?
We'll be right back to this interview, but first a message from today's sponsor, DUROLANE. You know that knee pain can really slow you down. Sometimes that knee pain is due to osteoarthritis, a disease that affects some 14 million Americans. Learn about osteoarthritis knee pain and how to alleviate it at oakneepainrelief.com. You'll find information there about non-surgical, non-opioid treatments for osteoarthritis knee pain that may help delay the need for knee surgery. One treatment you'll find there is DUROLANE, a single injection that may provide up to 6 months of relief from osteoarthritis knee pain. It's indicated for the treatment of mild to moderate osteoarthritis knee pain when conservative treatments have not worked. Risks can include general knee pain and pain at the injection site. Full prescribing information is at DUROLANE.com. Spartans say no to limits. You can learn more at oakneepainrelief.com. That's oakneepainrelief.com. All right, back to the interview.
For all of us listening and watching, we go on there, we find we're part of the 60%. Maybe my older son is. How do you unwind that? How do you read the book, obviously, but aside from that, what's one thing you do?
Okay, well, I'll tell you the one thing that I tell everyone to do, and it's what I do myself. People think I have no fear. I have plenty of fear. I say to everybody, you need to master the universal risk-taking equation. So what is that? We all have 2 things. We all actually have 2 fears in facing any action. Number 1 is FOMO, fear of missing out. The positive side of everything, right, is we're like, I want to do this to get this reward, this learning, this discovery. And we try and get our FOMO raging. You know, and I both know that visualization techniques are all about getting your FOMO raging, right? But the other side of the fear we face is fear of failure, right? We'd also agree that everybody has this. So a very simple equation that you need to master, and we'll talk about how to do that in a moment, is if your FOMO is greater than your fear of failure, you're going to take action. If your fear of failure is greater than your FOMO, you're not going to take action, right? You can see the equation in your head. So most people are like, just ramp your FOMO, visualize the positive, visualize. But that does nothing to decline your fear of failure. Nothing, right? So you can ramp it, but if your fear of failure is still higher, you're still not going to move. So I say to people, if you want to do one thing to get yourself in motion, as opposed to avoiding your fear of failure, I always say embrace your inner risk manager. And this is what my executive coach taught me, by the way. He's like, Sukhinder, like instead of thinking that your inner risk manager is just there to squash you and tell you, don't do something, you're going to be in harm. Look at the risks, name the risks you face, and do what I call imagining your failure mode. And literally thinking through the choice after the choice. Because once you start thinking through the choice after the choice, so imagine you make the first choice and it fails. Right now, think about what are the 5 other actions you would take. And 2 things happen as a result of that. Number 1, you realize what Jeff Bezos says, that most choices are not a one-way door. You don't go through and there's no way back. Most choices you make are 2-way doors. Like you can come back, and there are probably 5 more doors you can go through. So it's not nearly as binary as you think. And the second thing that happens is if it's rather scary and you can discover all those choices, you get to name your fears. You get to look them in the face. If you find out that your fear is an ego risk, like, oh my God, like I'm going to be embarrassed. I went on Joe's podcast and I got a 1-star rating and I'm going to imagine what I'm doing after that, right? Maybe I'm going to go do a post on LinkedIn and explain the thing I got wrong or, ask to come back on. So once you can imagine the things you would do, you really get to size those risks appropriately. And you're like, oh, my risk was just like ego risk. Okay, well, that's the easiest one to conquer, as opposed to, let's say, financial risk or other types of risk. So I think if you had to do one thing, I'd say to everybody, plan more for the downside than the up. Look at reducing your fear of failure by actively imagining the choices after the choice. And that's how you shrink your fear, right? Because you don't imagine it doesn't exist. You just say, okay, like, let me understand the things I would do if I fail, and how many choices are available to me. And the minute you realize a lot are available to you, you might actually get into motion. So that's a really active.
I called it upside downside decision making, right? Yes. I had to make a lot of decisions very, very quickly. And all right, what's the upside? What's the worst case downside? And so you're saying play it through.
And I'm saying play through the downside with far more precision than the up. The bigger the risk, you play the downside through more, right? I mean, you and I are both. You've been a CEO, you are a CEO, I've been a CEO, I've also been a biz dev person my whole life. I always say to people, I'm like, if you look at the best biz dev people, the entire contract is about the downside. They negotiate it in order to act. Like, think about the irony of that. They spend all their time not planning for, like, if the forecast is going to be right on a deal. It's about what happens if the forecast is wrong. And that's how they get into motion. That's called being a calculated risk taker.
Do you want to be a CEO again? Because I have a company here that I need some help with.
I definitely will be a CEO again. I mean, I tell you, I love being a CEO.
So we do have a good mission here. We change lives. The number one reason why somebody doesn't sign up for a Spartan or Tough is they're afraid.
Mm-hmm. I know. Afraid. I mean, it's remarkable, right? Sometimes, and I don't mean this in a bad way. It's to your point, like, this is everyone. And I think this idea that we don't have fear is ridiculous. The question is, like, how do you give people tactics, like literally tactics that say, like, look, I promise you that if you get an emotion, these are some of the things that are going to happen. And whether you succeed or fail, as long as you have impact, you will accumulate outsized rewards over time. By the way, you have to make many choices. So I'm always like, if you're going to choose once, you're putting a lot of weight on that first choice.
I guess in fairness, sorry to interrupt. I was just thinking, like, how do I teach my young son who I was sitting down with earlier today, who's definitely nervous about a tournament coming up? And I was just thinking an analogy would be, tell me if you like this, like if you and I lived near cliffs and we could jump into the water, but we had never done it before because we're young and we just never jump, but everybody around us jumps into cliffs, into the water. We would jump into 1 and then 2, and by the time you got to the 50th, you feel comfortable jumping off a cliff because it's what you do every day.
That's absolutely right. And by the way, I'd be like, hey, this probably from interval training. I'm not saying you jump off a 1-foot cliff, then 2, then 3, then 4. You might actually do 5 and then 15 and then back to 3. Like, that is the nature of risk taking. Not every choice is like linear and like it just gets nicely bigger, right? I mean, this. You might have bursts of like where you take a larger choice and then you return to something safer. Like, it's about the cadence though, and the commitment to a cadence. To your point, 3/4 of it is committing to you're going to do 50 jumps, like no matter what size. It's more the frequency that matters than the size of any individual jump.
Yeah, because the frequency starts to mute the concern on the outcome, right? Like you gain more data.
You gain more data, and in one of those, you want to make a bigger one. Maybe he's, done 10 cliff jumps that are of low size, and you're like, hey, we're going to try something nonlinear right now. And then I promise, just see how it feels, and then we may come back. So I'm not saying just take only little risks. I'm saying get in the habit of taking risks and find reason to take risks. I say that to everybody. Like, what do? I'm like, I bet you I can tell you 5 different ways you could take risks today. It's far more than this gigantic ambition type of risk that people think about. I just feel like, that's the magic. That's the magic of choosing possibility. You don't have to be perfect. It's the opposite of perfect. It's more like, well, if you knew you had 10 choices to make between now and success, shouldn't that free you to make more choices? But if you think you have one, my God, I'd be scared of that too.
Yeah, we can just continually
keep choosing.
Micro risks.
You got it. Micro risks, micro choices, macro choices, choice. There's many more choices to make between you and success.
I love it. So the big takeaway here, everybody listening, is one, you got to get the book. But even before you get the book, go to the website and let's take a risk assessment and find out what our story is. And then when we take the risk assessment on the website, do you give us suggestions?
Yeah. There's some early tips, and to be clear, there's no wrong choice. Does that make sense? There's just 4 archetypes, and all you want to do, it's like anything. You want to know where you're starting from, right? If I want to lose weight, I need whether I like it or not, I'm going to need to step on the scale and figure out, right? Or if I think I want to get more toned or fit or whatever. So there's no wrong answer. There's just what's your natural starting point, and then of course there are different tactics. By the way, the risk quiz has another type called the change seeker, and you and I both know that person. Maybe they'll take a lot of risks, but they move from thing to thing to thing, and you wonder if they ever have any impact. And they're so busy chasing the next opportunity that they don't capitalize on the current opportunity, right? That's an avid risk seeker. That doesn't mean it's more correct than being a contemplator. It just means you have different tactics. If you want to be a chooser, that's what I call it, somebody who keeps choosing, and a smart chooser. I love this saying from General Patton. He's he really talks about the fact that, you don't need to be reckless to take a risk.
So as we wrap up here, I can't help but go back selfishly to my son. And so he's about to go to this big tournament this weekend, and he's nervous. Typically in wrestling, you got to cut 3, 4, 5 pounds because everybody's cutting down in weight so that they get to wrestle somebody lighter. But because everybody's doing it, they're all wrestling the same people they would have wrestled anyway if nobody cut weight. So he's nervous to get on the scale today, right? Because think about the outcome means I can't eat for the next 24 hours. And he's nervous clearly about the outcome of the event. But maybe are you saying, hey, Jack, let's walk through the worst case scenarios?
Absolutely. It's so interesting. As I listen to you, you know what it tells me? I feel and we all, as parents, why don't we ever take our own advice? It tells me that I should be having the same conversation with my kids, because I see them sometimes paralyzed. And I've got a teenager and one in college and one who's in middle school. But I feel like I should be having the same conversations. How often as parents do we have the conversation with our kids about let's walk through the worst case scenario? We're so busy, you know what I mean?
And you wrote the book.
Yeah, and I wrote the book, but we're so busy, pumping our children full of positive visualization, which is great. But maybe having the opposite conversation about okay, let's walk through all the choices after the choice. So this happens, then what? This happens, then what? You take the shot, my daughter plays water polo. You take the shot, you don't make it. Okay, what? Well, if you take more shots, you're more likely to have more goals than if you take less shots. It's still, right? I mean, so all these things are true. I think that's fabulous advice for your son, and I should really take some of my own.
But that's probably because we've been through life and we could connect the dots, and a teenager who doesn't have a prefrontal cortex can't connect the dots.
Right, if you don't have enough experience to do pattern matching, right? But that's why, again, it sounds so cheesy to say, that's why I wrote the book. I really don't think of myself as an author. I think of myself as somebody who's an operator. But I really do feel that people have a misconception about what risk is. And I feel if I could just paint you a picture and say, it's not the pattern you expect, but there are patterns to risk taking. And if I showed you that they were, would you take more? I hope so.
Let's apply it for last topic here. Let's apply it to Spartan, Tough Mudder, a trail run, some of the stuff that people are paralyzed. They won't use their mouse and sign up for a race because, oh my God, or or when they're there, they're afraid of the obstacles. And same application, I would imagine. Just play it through.
Oh yeah, there's play too. And I would say, just like stepping back one, think about the fact that you've constructed races that are of multiple obstacles. By the way, every one of those obstacles can be thought of as a little risk, right? You yourself are like, look, there are 10 chances to be good in this race. If you're not, if you're not good at this part of the obstacle course, maybe your job is to master this other part of the obstacle course. So ironically, even the obstacle course itself, I think, is a good paradigm, if I could call it that way, for like you live life taking multiple risks, right? And you get to unlock different parts of the journey. And I will say to people like, okay, if you're not good at this part of the journey, you want to unlock the learnings, and then you want to optimize this next part of the journey. You can be calculated in how you approach an obstacle course, just like you can how you approach multiple choices. And I feel like in some ways your races are designed for exactly that.
I agree, and I like it. I like it when maybe we could collaborate with you on the risk-taking quiz that you have. And we could do that around Spartan and Tough Mudder.
Oh, I would love to do that. Like, you tell me when, and we'll figure out a way to do one together.
Take this little quiz. I know you're nervous. You're afraid you're not going to be able to throw the spear.
Yep.
What's the worst case outcome? You have to do 30 burpees. I can't do 30 burpees. Okay, what happens if you can't do 30 burpees?
Yeah, well, then you do. Yeah, exactly. Do you start with 5? Like, what? What do you do? I think. Yeah, I think it's a pretty cool idea. And I think for you, not that I'm here to give you business advice by any stretch, but thinking about how you get people to master what I call parts of the puzzle before the whole puzzle. I'm sure you know this, right? I would say to people like, don't presume that you fail if you can't put together the whole puzzle. If you master pieces of the puzzle and every one of those pieces has impact, I can guarantee you can put the puzzle pieces together another way and be successful again. So let's say somebody discovers out of taking one of your races that they're really not good at all 10 and they don't want to put themselves through it again, but they have a skill at one. Okay, well, that's impact. You can take that now into another sports adventure, right? Like, that's all true, but you only know if you try all 10. And then you can take the pieces you like and mix and match them and create a whole other kind of success.
I agree. And like I said, Susan, my assistant, has been taking notes copiously here. Never before at any podcast has she been interested, but you are... you're like a superstar.
Well, I guess this is a self-fulfilling prophecy because she's never going to say no. But is she giving us a thumbs up on this one?
What do you think?
Absolutely. I want the book.
No, she's got 2 pages of notes,
okay.
and she's already ordered the book while she's sitting here and she's taking the quiz. What do you think of that?
All right. Tell her to send me her results. I'm so curious what she is. Anyway, I really appreciate the time. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm always happy to talk Spartan. So tell me when.
Let's connect. We'll get you out to a race. I'll come see you and we'll talk.
That'd be so super fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Spartan Up Podcast. Spartan Up is your partner in resilience for mind, body, and spirit. We're here 3 days every week. Tuesdays, you can find Joe De Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan, interviewing biohackers, business leaders, authors, and athletes. Thursdays and Saturdays, catch episodes from our DECA, Endurance, Trail, Combat, and La Ruta series. Do you know someone who needs a little nudge? Maybe they could use some motivation, tactics to be stronger, healthier, happier, more successful. Tell them about our show. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment. We want to know who's watching and who's listening. Thanks. See you next time. This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by DUROLANE, a single injection that may provide up to 6 months relief from osteoarthritis knee pain. Risks can include general knee pain and pain at the injection site. You can see full prescribing information at durolane.com.